There are many ethical and moral issues that arise in businesses around the globe. Can markets discipline business to meet accepted ethical and moral standards? Or is government required to effect change in these areas? Legislation is essential in bringing about change in global climate, social and governance performance of companies. Fierce competition in markets can make it difficult for a company to change its policies unilaterally, especially if its competitors are operating on lower standards. Legislating for minimum standards levels the playing field so that everyone is meeting standards rather than those that do being at a competitive disadvantage. But we have reached a tipping point where businesses can't afford to have the negative PR that comes with a major breach of ethical issues. For example, on environment and labour standards. For several decades, corporate social responsibility, CSR, has increasingly been an essential component of running a business, especially one that trades globally. We now have environment, social and governance, ESG. I think this is closely related to CSR, although ESG is concerned with producing metrics that can be used externally in providing some objective assessment of a company's performance on these issues. I think CSR is principally about internal policies where ESG is attempting to be something a bit more scientific. Why have these voluntary initiatives happened? Well, to some extent, many business people do have strong ethics and want to be responsible in their business. There's many examples where strong principles and ethics have been the foundation of extremely profitable businesses. However, capitalism is often cutthroat. There are many unscrupulous business people who don't see beyond their fiduciary role to maximise profits. There's also business people who'd like to change their ESG policies to be more sustainable, but are constrained by the fact that they have to compete with companies that are not so ethical. I think that CSR and ESG have taken off not just because of voluntary actions on behalf of business. I think that activism has played a major role in this. NGOs, trade unions, lobbying groups, shareholder activism have all played a role. A company that acts unethically risks being exposed by activists, which can bring really negative PR. So I tip a hat to the activists for effecting real change in a much quicker way than the long process of introducing new legislation. Because all of this activity is voluntary, there isn't necessarily consistency in the way that these issues are judged. Certain companies or industries may be targeted because they're most likely to be picked up by global media. In this regard, a new information source has been set up to provide a public database of companies that have been assessed by one or more financial institutions as having high ESG risks. A coalition of NGOs launched a new website that tracks which companies are being excluded by investors and banks for ESG reasons. It's effectively a naughty list of companies in terms of violating the norms and values set by each investment firm. This is the list of companies that have been publicly excluded by financial institutions for reasons ranging from environmental impact to human rights and other sustainability issues. Most excluded corporations are barred due to climate issues. This accounted for 40% of exclusions. Weapons with 17% and tobacco with 12% of exclusions. I think it's the first time we've had a public database like this. It aims to inform investors and banks, civil society and media about which corporations are blacklisted by investors. The tracker lists a total of 4,532 companies that have been excluded by 87 financial institutions in 16 countries. Overall, I think this is a really positive development. However, I think we can identify 4 possible concerns. First, this isn't objective or scientific. There isn't a standardised set of metrics. There's no guarantee that there's balance, consistency, or objectivity in the way that a business's ESG performance is being judged. A second potential issue is that this isn't necessarily a moral or ethical judgment on behalf of the investment firm. The way I'm understanding these exclusions is that they're to do with risk in terms of the return to investment. It's not necessarily the case that the investment companies have high ethical standards themselves, although of course that is possible. But there is a risk that the database could be used to make judgments that simply go beyond the risk of investment, whereas that may have been the only criteria why a company was on the list. A third problem is that ESG assessments have risked becoming PR exercises. Information presented by companies doesn't necessarily represent reality. Given the potential damage that can be done to brand image, the PR elements of this have to be managed. There have been many accusations of greenwashing. Setting standards by legislation is black and white. It raises standards. If voluntary ESG becomes a PR exercise, it becomes a lot less effective at instigating positive changes. Fourth and finally, there are some who object to this on the grounds of it being a woke agenda. This is a press release from the chairman of the Committee on Oversight and Accountability. This is the main investigative committee of the US House of Representatives. He said that ESG is window dressing for liberal activism and far left ideology. Further, he said that the ESG agenda prioritizes leftist ideology over the growth of retirees' investments, and that this is an injustice to those who should shoulder the burden for their retirement savings. There is a real concern that the priority given to social policy instead of shareholder value can have a significant long-term impact on retirement savings. Those that divested out of oil lost a lot when the oil price rocketed because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is a fact. So I have to say that I agree with some of these points on the impact on retirement savings. But this isn't a bad thing when seen in a broader context. This is an example of short-termism versus long-termism. It's going to be very painful in the short term, and some of us will be worse off than if companies were merely allowed to continue polluting the planet and providing terrible working conditions. These values do not come cheap. Just in terms of the environment, we're all going to have to pay a lot more for goods that have been produced to high standards. Is this woke or leftist? There's no doubt that the chairman of the Oversight Committee would consider me both woke and leftist. However, there are many on the right who are also committed to business being conducted according to sustainable and ethical standards. Overall, I think that this new database is a positive development. These judgments are going to be made by the market, and it's good that they're out in the open. It provides more pressure for companies to change. However, I still think that legislation is where the biggest changes will come, so I'm still looking to governments to do a lot more in this regard. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please consider liking or subscribing. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.